Welcome to a discussion on banking and finance. In this discussion, we're going to be talking about how the Indian banking sector is going to grow in a very large manner in the next 5 years. The government has set a target of increasing the size of the Indian economy to $5 trillion by 2024 and $7.5 trillion by 2030. This presents an enormous opportunities for banks, and we're going to be looking at what banks have done in other countries to grow, and we're also going to look at what normal strategies they're looking at and how those strategies will not probably yield a result. So I'm going to just take you through a couple of slides. The first thing are these targets: $5 trillion by 2024, $7.5 trillion by 2030. Coming to the opportunities, now let's just examine them. If you look at these two slides, which I'm going to show you now, are extremely significant. Look at how the first 10 top 10 companies in the world are arranged. Out of the top 10, 8 of them are banks, and 5 of them are Chinese banks. So that is something that you really need to look at. Okay, these are the top 10 companies in the world. The only two that are not banks in this list are Apple and Royal Dutch Shell. Now, coming to the Indian list, this is what the Indian list looks like. There's only one bank in this entire list. So, what this indicates is, given what is happening around the world and what is happening in India, there's going to be a massive amount of disruption happening in this list in the next 5 years, and in 7 years, we'll definitely see it. So, coming now to the question, my main question: which of these banks? I've given a whole list of banks over here. Which of these banks is the dark horse? Which of these banks are really going to grow in scale to become one of the largest, to become some of the largest companies in the world? Okay. Now, what can banks do? Do they grow their CASA deposits? Do they become fully digital banks to be able to grow? Or do they do something entirely different? And my view is that they're going to do something entirely different, which Indian banks really have not really thought about till today. And for that, I want to take a look at what's happened around the world. Let's have a look at what's happened around the world. This is what has happened in the United States. And this is how banks in the United States grew. For instance, in 1866, Citibank of New York financed the transatlantic cable. It aligned itself to US government policy and financed the transatlantic cable. JP Morgan built the Trans-Northern Pacific Railroad in 1866 again. Then the JP Morgan and Citibank aligned themselves to Theodore Roosevelt's plan and built the Panama Canal. This happened in 1904. Coming to what has happened in after the 1940s. For instance, in 1948, Citibank aligned itself with the US government's Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Europe. They made a large amount of money through fee-based transactions and through arrangers' fees. Similarly, in the Channel Tunnel in the UK and in between UK and France, on the British side, the banks were NatWest and Midland Bank, and on the French side, we had BNP Paribas, Credit Lyonnais, and Bank Indo-Suez. These banks grew because they aligned themselves with the policies and the plans of the British and the French governments. More recently, in the UAE, very large construction projects of the Burj Khalifa and the Palm Islands were plans of the Dubai government, which banks in the region have aligned themselves to, and they have seen massive growth by doing that. More recently, again, in China, some of the largest construction projects in the world have happened in China and had the backing of the Chinese government. The Three Gorges Dam project was financed by Chinese Development Bank. Shanghai Pudong International Airport, again China Development Bank. Then you had the large projects in transportation, in energy, and in city development being financed by Chinese banks. That is why Chinese banks have come in the top 10 list, because they align themselves with the policies of the Chinese government. Most recently, they've gone and tried to finance the One Belt, One Road project, which is President Xi Jinping's pet project. And it has increased the size of these Chinese banks. So basically, the idea here is, which I have covered in concept one, is the alignment of banks with the larger plan of the national government of the country that they represent. Now, the second thing is about partnerships and joint ventures. This is the second concept which I'm going to talk about. I won't deal with this in such considerable length, but I'll just say that this is extremely important. Do banks tie up for achieving this? This is going to be done through partnerships. And Banks have to decide which are the state governments or the central government that they have to align themselves with. Do they which are the developers and industry houses that they align themselves with or collaborate with to deliver that growth, and then do they collaborate with global financial institutions to do this? So this I will not deal with this here, but I will just say that these strategic partnerships are going to be extremely important for banks to grow. The third concept that we are going to be talking about is taking the venture capital part of the businesses which are currently in private equity and under private equity and venture capital, and taking this in-house within the bank by betting on business models and by betting on new technologies. For instance, let me tell you what Citibank has done, because this is one of the most innovative banks in the world. Citibank in 1897 set up the foreign exchange network. This was the first bank to go into the foreign exchange network in a very big way. Then in 1956, they took a bet on uniform container cargoes. And in 1958, Citibank essentially took a large part in financing of the modern passenger jet. So Citibank has taken these calls. Their management have taken these calls, and Citibank has grown. Citibank again was one of the first banks to get into the ATM in 1977. They aligned themselves with the US government in 1995 to finance the NASA space shuttle program. And more recently, Citibank has got into smart banking and they have got into Google Wallet. So they have moved with technology, and Indian banks are not really taking. They need to learn from banks like Citibank and take some of these ideas into their essential structures and their constructs, and then align themselves with these kind of ideas to grow. Now, coming to India, again back to India, look, if you want to grow, you have got the kind of regime that we have had over the last 30, 40 years. It has created a certain kind of bank management. And this is across the country. This has happened across the country and its banks. And there needs to be new thinking brought into the boards of these banks to be able to grow. You've got to bring in people. You've got to bring in new people. You've got to bring in people with new ideas who can, who have the vision and the capacity to think on a very large scale, to be able to take those calls on what projects to get into, what kind of technologies to get into, to be able to grow. It's not going to happen through CASA deposits. It's not going to happen through digital banking. It is by changing the very basic culture of the bank to grow on a very major scale by taking on large bets on the Indian economy. Now, coming to the possibilities for infrastructure development in India, government has declared a plan to invest $1.4 trillion or 100 lakh crores in infrastructure by 2024. Now, I do not think they can spend 100 lakh crores in 2020 by 2024, because it requires the raising and spending of 5,480 crores a day. Now, even if you've done, for instance, if you build a large power plant or you build a large, very huge dam, which costs, let's say, 70,000 crores, you have to spend, and you want to do it in 3 years, you have to spend money at the rate of 64 crores a day. In this particular case, in India, we have a situation where we have to spend, the government is committed to spend 5,480 crores a day. To spend such a large amount of money on a daily basis, or that's what you're planning to do, you need a special project structure to be able to handle that kind of capex intensity. Such structures exist in the UK and they exist in China. China has been doing this on a regular basis. Hundreds of projects are going on in China on a daily basis. In the UK, they have something called the Large Projects Authority, which is staffed by 200 project specialists, which have a combined capacity to execute 200 projects worth 500 billion pounds sterling simultaneously. So we need this kind of structure also when we are thinking about doing the kind of capex program that the government of India has mandated in its program, and that is also mandated in the BJP manifesto. So that's one thing that we need to think of. Now, when it comes to banks and what kind of projects they should take up, we need to think about there are a couple of these large schemes which are where you can test the ideas pretty quickly and execute projects on the ground. One such scheme that banks can think about taking part in is the Kolkata waterfront. Now, this is around 2,500 acre property in the heart of Kolkata city. It's the old Kolkata port, and the redevelopment of this port is a project worth around some $20 billion. So this is a project. It looks like this today. If you look at it, this is how Kolkata port looks, and it's a great project to work on for a bank. And this is how it will look like in 2027 when it's fully constructed. Now, the project like this gives a bank stature. It gives a bank huge amount of experience in and a huge amount of revenue in terms of arrangers fees, in terms of LCs, and all kinds of fee-based services that the bank can make a lot of money on by taking part in such a project. The other project is I'll just show you that. The other project is the Mumbai Eastern Waterfront. This is the old Mumbai port area, which looks like this today. Currently, the shipping ministry is looking at this project. But what I am talking about is phase 2 of this project, which is worth some $40 billion. So this is another project. It looks like this, and this is what it will look like when it is fully built in 2027. So this is another project that banks can take a part in and be, kind of financiers to this project, and again raise a huge amount of money for this project and earn arrangers fees and also other kind of services that they can provide in terms of structuring and likewise. So there's a huge opportunity that this kind of project presents for banks. Now, the government of India, as far as has been is very clear that it is going to follow this kind of program that seeks to expand the Indian economy to around a $5 trillion economy by 2024 and a $7.5 trillion economy by 2030. So this is a plan that is, sort of written in stone, and it can be banked upon to deliver. So banks need to think in terms of what they can do to be part of this kind of program by aligning themselves to the government of India, to the government of India's plans, and they'll see similar growth that has happened in China, that has happened in the United States, that I've just shown you. And then coming back to the same question and coming back to the same slide which I've shown you before, banks can actually take up this. Indian banks can rank among the first 10 companies in the world, and they can become really, really big by taking part in projects that are supported by the government of India. And then now, this is the slide that I would end with, saying that which of these banks is going to be in that list, in that global list of top 10 companies, and is it IDFC, is it Kotak Mahindra Bank, is it State Bank of India, is it HDFC, is it ICICI, or is it any of the other banks? So we don't know which of these banks is going to be really, really large, but the possibility exists, and I think bank managements will need to think in terms of what they can do to be part of the global league. Well, I'm done with my current views on the Indian banking sector and its potential for growth in the next 5 years. It's going to be an extremely exciting area. And I have a lot of other ideas in other areas which I will be coming out in the next few days and weeks and months. So kindly subscribe to my channel and do give me your feedback on how you like the ideas, what do you see in this sector, what do you see in the banking sector, what do you see for the Indian economy, and what do you see in general for strategic design, as I would call it. So let's keep in touch and kindly subscribe to my channel and let me know what you feel. Thank you so much for your time.